Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2500, Chapter 5, Technology in Counseling. So the use of technology has been present in counseling for the last 60 years or so. Dr. Joyce Brothers used it on the radio. She was a media psychologist, so basically people would call in and ask questions about, different psychological issues. There's also interactive video therapy, where the client and the therapist were connected by television. Telephones were used for suicide hotlines and 24-hour counseling services, and it's still quite popular now. Audio tapes and videotapes for supervision and training counselors. So let's say, for example, if you go into a graduate program, some programs will have a class where you actually will be recording yourself, role-playing a therapy session or multiple sessions with a classmate or something like that. And then from there, the class would watch each other and then basically critique each other. Webcams is the most modern technique, but technology is quickly changing. And obviously we all know that because of the pandemic, a lot of us have been using Zoom, if not other types of webcam-based communication. Technologies used for counseling are software to aid in report writing, Excel spreadsheets for recording client data, statistical analysis packages for analyzing client data, and publishing software for marketing and client recruitment, and software for assessment and testing. And we'll be discussing a little bit of these throughout this lecture. So we really can't discuss technology without addressing the internet and its existence. Personal communication, consultation, supervision, referral, professional development are all things that you will use via email or a listserv. So a listserv is basically kind of like a group email that is given to a group for an organization. So they'll just send it all to all the people that are subscribed, let's say, to their agency website. Internet use for client information, such as professional and informational websites, advertising of services, provisions of counseling services, marketing, and much more. So what that is basically saying is, people use the internet to find their counselors sometimes, and then also counselors or agencies that provide counseling services will most likely also have websites that describe what they do, right? So it's very, very, interactive. When we talk about the internet, we're talking about online counseling, video counseling, cyber therapy, self-guided web-based interventions, emails, text messages, and then of course social media networks. The technological age, there are some unexpected questions just because technology is moving faster than we can probably think on an ethical level. So we're talking about guidelines, competencies, ethics to regulate usage, and privacy protection for the client, which are all very, very important. And you saw about most of those things addressed when it comes to ethics, right? However, in technology and on the internet, it's a little bit slower and behind. Now let's talk about online counseling and distance counseling. 100 million Americans have sought help or mental health information online. Online counseling is one of the fastest growing health services on the internet, and we'll be talking about some of the different major websites that have popped up, especially since the pandemic has occurred. We'll probably not replace face-to-face, although, with communicable diseases, it actually might. We don't know. Initially, online counseling was through emails. Now it is synchronous through chat rooms and live session webcams, such as Skype, iChat, Zoom. There are many, many other ones. And most apps are free, so it is cost effective. So let's talk a little bit about definitions. Online counseling is performed strictly with the use of computers via the internet. So we're talking about emails, websites, chat rooms, and webcam. Distance counseling uses a variety of media in addition to computers. So we're talking about telephones, television satellite hookup, video, and audio tape as well. Obviously, we're slowly moving away from all the stuff that you probably don't even know about and going all online, or there's a digital computer version of all this, right? Online counseling can either be synchronous or asynchronous. So synchronous counseling is similar to a live conversation. Like if we were talking on the phone, that would be considered live, right? So we're talking about chat rooms or video conferencing, like Zoom. Asynchronous counseling would be using emails, and the response might come back the next day or a week later even. The types of online and distance counseling are telephone counseling, email counseling, bulletin board counseling, chat room counseling, web telephony counseling, video conferencing, computer assisted or simulated counseling, and then e-coaching. All the definitions of these words that I'm giving you right now are found on page 119, but we will discuss some of these, but most of them are pretty self-explanatory, right? All right, video conferencing, or VCon is what it's also known as, can deal with people who might be living with depression, have suicidal ideation, eating disorders, attention deficit disorders, panic disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, grief, obsessive compulsive disorder, and schizophrenia. Obviously, certain things might work better than others, and this is just a list of some of the stuff that has had evidence-based proof that it has been effective when it goes on to video conferencing. Now let's talk a little bit about the positives. Convenient for both the counselor and the client. Store and forward systems such as emails. Take an assessment, it stores it, and then the person can forward it through email to the other party. Stores and forward systems avoid having to set up specific schedules for both parties. Have access to counselors in a different location. It doesn't have to be, let's say, in the same neighborhood or anything like that because we're doing it all on the computer. Have access while having a disability. For some people with certain physical disabilities, let's say, or some mental health disabilities, they might not be able to leave the home. And so, being able to access a person to help them online is actually very, very helpful. Instead of talking once a week, emails allow for more frequent contacts, less costly than face-to-face, and if through email, all communication is automatically documented. Obviously, when you send email, there's a copy that you have, and you can always refer to it again, right? So because of that, I'll just say really quickly, make sure that when you communicate with your clients in a professional manner, okay? Don't do texting type talk like, what you do with your friends. It also reduces client anxiety or embarrassment. Let's say that they are a little shy talking to someone face to face, but they'll be a little bit more braver if it's online. Also, in chat rooms, you can be anonymous. However, that is problematic as well because if a client talks about self-harm or harm to others, child abuse, it is still anonymous. And sometimes we need to report that, but we can't because we actually don't know who this person is. Usually paid by the client, not insurance, and that could be seen as a freedom because for some insurance companies, the counselor actually has to do a report to let them know what's going on, to show improvement so that they're willing to pay more, right? If we keep it all confidential, some insurance companies will say, well, we don't know if you're actually getting better, if you're actually doing your job, so we're not going to pay. So when a person pays for themselves, then they don't have to worry about that component. Now let's talk a little bit about the negatives. Lack of presence in the counseling situation, which is probably the number one most important comment people say about the negative of online is you don't build that relationship that you would build in real life, right? When you're doing therapy in person, there is like a human connection between the two. It's a little bit harder when it's done on web. Difficult to build rapport. It shows genuine positive regard with clients in the same way face-to-face allows. Counselors cannot gauge nonverbal behaviors usually used to confer hypothesis, diagnosis, identify incongruent communication and behavior. So what that is basically saying is, like when you're on, let's say, a Zoom call with a class, you only see pretty much about the chest to the head, right? And that's it. So as a counselor, I would like to look at your entire body because you might be shaking your knee, and that might be something that I want to address. Or maybe you're going to say like, I'm so happy, but I could also see that you're frowning while you're saying that, or you roll your eyes. All those things I might not be able to see, let's say if you didn't have your camera on and stuff like that, right? So again, that prevents me from making certain assumptions that I should follow through to confirm or basically say, oh no, actually that's not part of it. There's no regulation of websites that say that they provide therapy, so there could be fake websites that talk about therapy. And that's one thing that we're always really concerned about when it comes to professionals is this place or this website actually vouched for by professionals in the field? Because anyone can literally open up a website and say, counseling and all this other stuff, and it might all be just a big old scam. That means that it might not be a mental health specialist, which means that they might not be trained, which means that they actually could do harm to you. So it's kind of a buyer beware market, you know? So this is why we want you to do a lot of research. And when we talk about it in this chapter, we recommend legit sites that has been vouched for, let's say for by this textbook, by me, or by other professionals. Technically, everyone needs to provide their credentials when it comes to the professional in this, right? Number one, primary credentials would be a diploma from a university and additional training. Number two, or secondary credentials would be licensure or certification. Tertiary credentials is professional associations to which a counselor belongs to. So these are all the different types that the counselor should provide for you so you can see and you can understand where this person is coming from and what kind of training they've had. If a client works with an online counselor that is not part of the APA or the ACA or the National Board of Certified Counselors, or state licensure board, they cannot file a complaint if any issues arise, because if they don't belong anywhere, you can't really make a complaint because those companies or those organizations will say, well, we never vouched that they were going to be effective. So then they can't fix the situation, right? Populations that are not good for online counseling would be suicidal clients and clients who are experiencing a crisis, because if it's asynchronous, it's not going to help a person who's going through a crisis at that moment, right? So imagine a delay in response because it's asynchronous for a client in a panic or in a crisis mode. And then let's talk about the ethical issues, which is confidentiality is a major concern. And we talked about HIPAA in the last chapter, I believe, in ethics. So again, you can refer to that and understand why that might be an issue. There's also virtual private networks or VPNs that offer encryption on data. So certain agencies might have a VPN that allows people to work from home. It helps ensure confidentiality because it offers data protection, verification of data, and the admittance control over the site. So what happens is when you have a VPN, your computer then becomes, let's say, protected to a certain extent, and hopefully that will help because you're actually able to connect towards the actual agency's, intranet. An intranet is basically internet within a specific company, and they don't allow a lot of other things like porn sites or whatever, suspicious websites and stuff like that. How can a client be sure that the person on the other end of the phone is actually a counselor? We don't know, right? The client doesn't know sometimes, and so that's why we want to make sure that there is good research done before a person goes towards a specific site for help. The National Board of Certified Counselors, or NBCC, says that the counselor must have all the links necessary for a client to ascertain the counselor certification and or licensure. So that might be, basically using the logo of a specific licensure certification on your website to show that you've been authorized with them. But let's be honest, in this world that we're living in now, you can also just put a picture in there, right? So you need to also do proper, verification as well, so that anyone can go in and verify the fact that you are part of this organization or this, certification or licensure, so that hopefully that shows that you actually are a professional. If the client and the counselor are in two different states, what happens? Because actually, if you think about it, there might be different rules in each of those states. So what happens? The first link that I have here is for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAIN, which offers some comparisons in the field of sexual violence or sexual assault. So you can go onto that site and then you can pick a couple states, and then you can also pick the specific subject, and then it'll contrast and compare the differences between each of those states. An example also would be elder abuse by your client. If the client states does not require a report, but your, as a counselor, state does require a report, what do? You're going to need to figure this all out before you go out and do it. So for some people, they might just do online stuff or within the state of California or another state. Just like face-to-face counseling, clients must sign an informed consent. Again, we talked a little bit about that in the ethics chapter, but you don't lose any of the things that you would do in live online. Now let's move on to computer-assisted counseling. utilizes computer software to provide assessment, intervention, and specific counseling techniques to clients. So what this is saying is that there are software programs that are actually invented or created to help a counselor with certain things that you might not need a live person to do. Software packages are information on depression or anxiety, amongst many other things. There's also computerized virtual reality systems, or VRS, which is dealing with systematic desensitization. So those things might help with phobias or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason why is because there are certain steps that a person can do to basically conquer their fears or their anxiety or PTSD. And so they don't actually need a person, because sometimes they can also do it alone because they want to do it alone as opposed to with a live counselor as well. Then interestingly, I just want to show you robotics are being used to help with the elderly. And there is a link here for Robear, which is a Japanese robot that is supposed to help the elderly in Japan. And it's really interesting in Japan because Japan does not like foreigners. So right now there are a lot of elderly people, more elderly people than there are, I believe, younger people. So all the younger people are busy working, so they can't actually take care of the elderly. So what do we do? And since they don't like foreigners, how are they going to have or get help? So some of the scientists there have created different types of robots, and they talk about the status of it, as of last couple of years. It's really interesting. There's a little audio clip, so you can just listen to the entire audio clip instead. And it's really interesting when they interview the elderly as well as the people who created the robots and all their different perspectives on culture and stuff like that, which is very different than Western countries like the US. Smartphones and tablets are lightweight, easy to carry, has most features of a computer, but they might have limited memory capacity. But obviously, as we go forward into the future, computers are going to be a lot more powerful, every year, right? But this is where we would use our software that we were talking about previously, is on these devices. It receives cognitive behavioral therapy such as CBT on their phones, and those will help you with anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. So you can sort of see that some of the stuff where it causes people to have some sort of fear or anxiety can be resolved online pretty commonly and easily compared to other issues. Counseling agencies and managed care organizations are setting up interactive consumer services so that you can do a self-help component, also health education programs, and then also coaching programs as well. And all these things can be done on the computer with some software to help the person. Here are some positives when it comes to computer-assisted counseling. Helpful when the client cannot afford frequent sessions. Used as a supplement between sessions, and then if it is on the phone, it can be accessible 24 hours a day. The negatives are programs can be programmed incorrectly. Obviously, if a program is not thought out well and completed that way, there might actually be some things that it misses, and that could also do harm for a person. Maintenance and updates can be expensive. It really does depend. And also some of the software is very expensive. No rapport with the client if he, she, or they use an app. So that's always an issue, right? There's no relationship. The person's just using a computer software program. It is not human, so cannot show empathy, emotion, or nonverbal cues. Sometimes the client comes in because they just need to connect with someone. But when we do computer-assisted counseling, that is not going to be there. Cannot assess and diagnose a client, create a treatment plan, or monitor a client's progress without human input. So if you're using solely a computer, it might not necessarily be helpful when it comes to certain special situations with a client. Now let's talk about ethical concerns. When a counselor uses computer-assisted counseling as a primary means of intervention instead of using it as an aid. So what that is saying is, sometimes we take for granted computer technology. Imagine a parent and a child, right? Let's say that the parent is super busy, so then they just give the child an iPad to keep themselves busy. So obviously there's going to be some, it's like an iPad is not a good parent, if that makes sense, right? And the same thing is happening is don't use an iPad or software instead of an actual counselor. If there's depression or severe anxiety, counselors need to assess and monitor for suicidal ideation. So again, those are human components that a computer might not necessarily pick up. Anyways, not now, maybe in the future, we don't really know. Now let's talk about technology in assessment and diagnosis. Assessment means the accumulation of knowledge about a person from a variety of sources for purposes of providing some kind of intervention, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll give you an example. An assessment is a group of things to help us understand who you are. So if you were a student applying for college, the group of assessments that we would use would be your GPA, maybe your SAT scores, letters of recommendation, your personal statement. So it's not just one of those things. We're using a bunch of those things to get a understanding of who you are as a person. Because let's say your GPA wasn't so great, but you are a really great writer, you have really great recommendations, and your SAT was good, right? But if we only chose one, which is GPA, it actually might not necessarily do you any benefit, right? It actually would do you harm. So we're looking for a group of things so that we really do understand them as a person. There are web-based assessments, such as psychological evaluations, psychotherapeutic diagnostics, client self-exploration, and outcome assessment. So these are all the different types of things that you can do on a computer that are considered an assessment of some sort, right? You fill out surveys about your interests, and then we get to know you about more about you that way, or it might be an actual examination or a survey or a questionnaire. Things that they measure would be IQ, aptitude, level of emotional intelligence, client attitudes, or personality characteristics, among a lot of other things. Routine Outcome Monitoring, or ROM, talks about client progress monitoring. It identifies the severity of the client's concerns at intake, monitors the increase or decrease of symptoms over the course of therapy. So we're talking about symptomology, but then also your behaviors and also your client thoughts. And then, of course, periodic times during the follow-up with the client for outcome assessment. So we might give you some sort of type of test or survey or questionnaire, and then we get to know where you are when it comes to, let's say, your level of depression. And then hopefully that will help the counselor or whoever it is use that and say, okay, well, this is what they got, this is the results. Okay, let's talk to them about this or this or this topic, because it seems like it's on their mind. Test interpretation and scoring software. Scoring and provides a narrative assessment, personality traits, and neuropsychological problems. So these are some of the things that computer software could help us when it comes to psychology, right? It's to score your results and then also provide you with, like, let's say bar graphs or some types of diagnostics so that we can understand where you are when it comes to a specific survey. It also helps with understanding and scoring personality trait surveys and then also neuropsychological problems. Databases. The Dangerous Assessment Database. This is really interesting. Did you know that there is actually a database of information that lets a person know or helps aids an expert in deciding whether to release potentially dangerous psychiatric patients? The statistical information that is used to predict the likelihood that a released psychiatric patient would be a danger to society. So sometimes you guys will go, why do they just let everyone out? Well, there's actually certain testings and stuff like that that will actually provide you with statistical information so that you can use your judgment or that person's judgment, whoever is involved with this, to make a decision. Isn't that interesting? Anyways, so there are about 1,000 input questions about it. And it's a little bit of family background, childhood behavior, and also responses to therapy that they use for the Dangerous Assessment Database. And isn't that just really, really fascinating? There are actually certain surveys that actually can tell whether or not you're lying when you're answering your questions as well. And that's also really interesting. But statistics can be very, very informative. So in reference to the previous slide about the psychiatric patients, the information is then weighted for reliability on a scale from unconfirmed reports to certified reports, where there have been attempts to corroborate the evidence. What that is saying is they're checking for consistency. That's what reliability is all about. So when they have all this data information, and then when they actually, let's say, talk about specific clients or patients, does that information actually make sense and consistent with what their predictions were? So they will check to see and follow up with each person to see whether or not, if they score within a certain range, will they behave the way that this survey or the statistic is predicting. Bias is accounted for by input from expert assessors to ascertain any underlying factors that might influence judgment. So then humans will also be put into it to say, well, for this specific case, we want to also consider these things as well. And that's what it's saying is there's a computer element, but there's also a human element as well. To assess for self-harm and suicidality, there's the Clinical Decision Support System, CDSS, which is a step-by-step sequence of decisions for diagnosis and symptomology. Other uses for database would be databases for maintaining assessment results, like spreadsheets, and then also mainframe statistical packages for recording and analyzing information. So let's say that you were surveying 1,000 people, they enter in their information into this, and then it will also data crunch as well. Use of assessment programs that incorporate multiple computerized instruments. So certain programs you can create like a game, and the game will be used as part of the test, but then you might also have video parts or whatever, there's a lot of different components. Electronically record patient tracking software with pre and post treatment measures. So maybe they are talking about drinking, right? So they report all that stuff, and then now there's a database of information about this person every day, and then you can analyze it over, let's say, a month period or something like that. There's also computerized biofeedback assessment, which is things that are hooked up to a person's body, and then it can monitor like your heart rate, your sweat, and all that other stuff. Video, audio, USB or CD-ROM, iCloud or Dropbox to store the data. Obviously, there's different ways to, have that data stored away. And then, of course, you can also email and fax or transmit the data as well because it's already all electronic. Now let's talk about the positives when it comes to databases. You have access to fast, accurate, highly accessible testing and scoring, nearly errorless. Imagine a human having to enter in 50,000 data points. Most likely they're going to probably make a mistake, unfortunately, right? But with a computer, it's already entered in there. You don't have to worry about that. Data are accessible as soon as the respondent finishes the assessment. Just like, taking a quiz online, your results immediately if, it's programmed to let you know, right? Stored in electronic form for easy transfer to a statistical package for analysis or to be incorporated into a data bank. Again, so once you report all that stuff, it can actually go into another computer software that analyzes things. Immediate access to instructions, assessment items, and scoring techniques. Programs can be updated as needed. If data is scored in a central location, norms can be updated frequently. So norms means, like, let's say out of 1,000 people, what is the average, right? So when you take a test, a specific test, it might be added right into that information pool, and then we can find out what the norm is. The norm is adjusted all the time then. Assessment can be taken almost at any place or any time. Let's say as long as you have a computer or internet connections and stuff like that. Since everything is done electronically, no material costs. Imagine all the paper you had to buy, and then you had to photocopy pencils or paper or pens, all that supplies that you used to have to do before. Now you don't necessarily have to do any of that anymore. So that would be actually considered environmentally friendly as well. Now let's talk about the negatives of databases. Some assessments on the internet do not meet the APA standard. And the reason why is because some of the stuff that people put online, we don't even know that they put it online, right? You just happen to find it. So that means that not all of that stuff has been actually examined thoroughly. Online assessments cannot always verify reliability or validity. So when you have reliability and validity, that means that people have gone through a whole process to check to see if this test is legit, right? But if you just enter in a test online, we don't know what the results are. So, like sometimes they'll give you the results like you are this type of person, but we don't know how they found that out. In APA or other organizations that vouch for their tests, because they've actually gone through a whole rigorous testing process. If counselors are not present, does not know if the client understands instructions. So let's say that the computer reads out the instructions or it's typed out. Sometimes a client or the person taking the test might not understand what's going on, and they're just going to go forward anyways. When you have a real person administering an assessment, they can look at you and say, hey, do you have any questions about this? And then you can also ask immediately, right? Or maybe if you have a questionable facial figure, then they're going to go, oh, you look confused. Can we answer some of your questions that you have? Difficulty in explaining results for someone with low IQ score or assessed in a negative way. So imagine if there's a cognitive thing that is going on, right, with a client, and you explain to them in person. You can also read their body language and stuff like that, and also talk to them in a specific vocabulary level that will reach them. However, on a computer, it might be a very specific standard when it comes to the way it's written, and a person with a cognitive disability might not be able to understand what's going on. Did the client take the assessment or did someone else? We don't know, right? Software can become corrupt and information is lost. Have you ever lost a Word document or something when you've written it? Obviously, it does happen, unfortunately. Sometimes your computer crashes. There's many reasons why, and those are risks that we have to take. Here are some ethical concerns with databases. When converting an assessment from paper to pencil to online, their psychometric properties may get lost. I know it sounds really funny that if you say, like, if I turn this paper test into a computer test, how could it be different? It actually can. The same thing when it comes to changing it from one language to another, then it needs to be, again, reevaluated. This is the reason why when we rely on certain trusted organizations, it's because they've actually gone through all these processes to go through the considerations, right? But if you just do anything online, we don't know what happened. Was it tested? We don't know any of that, right? But when it comes from a specific organization, then we know that it has been vouched for. Okay. Counselors need to do research on the new version's reliability and validity because the way that they answer the questions on computer might be very different, so the answers might be different as well because of that. Limits of confidentiality to some unreliable sites. Again, let's say that you answered all this stuff on a website that asks you all these personal questions. We don't know where that information is going to go afterwards, right? You don't know where it is. But for trusted sites, they usually will state all of that, because there's an ethical code that they're following. Security of data transmission and storage from some sites could be dangerous. And we hear about that all the time when it comes to apps and stuff, right? If it comes from a certain country, we might not trust it because maybe they're just data mining instead. Now let's talk about technological aids for clients' intervention. Counselors now have access to an array of tools that can improve their clinical interventions. So what that is saying is before you might have some advanced counseling techniques like that you're talking or doing journaling or role playing and stuff like that. Well, the computer comes with its own set of tools that you can also use as well. Endless possibilities to find new ways for clients to express themselves. An example would be Project Spectrum, which is created by Google. It gives people with autism a way to express the images in their heads in tangible ways through Google's modeling software. So it allows a person to kind of express what they're thinking in their heads in a visual so that you can also see it as a counselor. And then we can have a dialogue about what's going on. Expressive arts therapy. With smartphones and tablets, making videos to tell stories. So expressive arts therapy basically means being able to express yourself through various programs or mediums, right? The example that the book provides is Audacity and Window Movie Maker. So those are digital cameras that can document visual evidence of treatment progress, such as hoarding, right? So you might have them take a picture of their home, and then let's see as they go through therapy, they'll take a picture of their home again to see whether or not the hoarding is slowly going away, or is it getting worse, or is it staying the same. Voice recorders can create personalized progressive muscle relaxation or guided imagery script that can be used out of sessions. So with voice recorders, the therapist can actually create a personalized, let's say, muscle relaxation technique for a specific client. And then the client can listen to it over and over again when they're not in session, when they need it. There's also eCBT and CBT referee. They track your thoughts and analyze them as the moments they occur. So it kind of could be like a journaling type of thing. There's also hypermedia. Hypermedia means numerous multimedia formats together, combined together. So it could be video, music, and animation put together to help this person or allow this person to express themselves. Now let's talk about the positives of technological aids for client intervention. New technologies can improve the personalization of treatment, provides the client with interventions tailored to their needs. So what that is saying is, let's say that you and I'm the counselor and you're the client, right? Because I know exactly what's going on with you, we can actually pick and choose specific things that are specific just to you. As opposed to me just giving you a general type of help, I'm now personalizing it specifically just for you. Mobile devices increase exposure to therapy and extend the interventions. So what that is saying is because the computer is so accessible, because most of us have a computer or a smartphone now, more people are getting therapy. So that is a positive. Now let's talk about the negatives. All materials are supplemental, so not many negatives. So what that is saying is all these apps and stuff are just the additional help. So you wouldn't see that as a negative, right? Cost can be an issue, although many apps are free, which is very true. You can go to the app stores and look at all the stuff that's self-help, and you'll notice that some of them might actually be $1 or free, or there might be a trial, or it could be very expensive. It really does depend. And of course, if a client has an e-diary, how confidential may be a concern, right? Because it is online, we don't know where the things are stored unless they tell you, but some places are liars, obviously. So we really do need to get professionals in the field to recommend a specific app, let's say. Ethical concerns is that counselors need to make sure that the materials fit the client's needs and be beneficial to the client. Do not just use because the counselor is enthusiastic about it. Just because you love it doesn't mean that your client's going to love it, right? So do not use if the client does not want to use them. So you can't force a client to use a technique that they don't want to do, because it's just not going to end up to be positive, right? However, you might be able to convince them to try it out and then let you know, and then you two can decide how to move forward. All right, now let's talk about technologically based resources for counselors and clients. There are electronic databases and journals. So if you have written any papers in class, most likely you've probably used the school library database. So there's online journal databases. An example would be PsycInfo, which I use all the time when I do research, and I'm sure you do too. Free or at a cost. If you're a student or a professor, the school might actually pay for the access, which is why people want to become a student so they can get access to all these valuable databases when they do their research. Membership usually allows access to that organization's database, and then also can be saved and used for research or education. So you can actually save the articles, email them to yourself, download them, and then use them later on. Access the latest information on nearly any counseling topic in a database, right? The one in the book that they recommend is Counseling Today, which is where the hyperlink is. And also it helps with current issues and questions in the field of counseling. So again, you're always getting the up-to-date stuff because people are contributing to it all the time. So that's really wonderful. You might read a book, but if that book was written in 1995, I'm sure that a lot of that information has been changed or improved since then, right? But with an online database, it can be updated all the time, so you're going to get more recent research. Social networks for counselors. Online allows for professionals to connect with one another. Blogs are now being designed to build an online network. So the one that the book talks about is called therapy networking, where you go on there and then you can actually connect with other people. It's just like Facebook or LinkedIn, but specifically for therapy. Share experiences and opinions as a counselor on that site as well. There's also case management technology, scheduling appointments with full slate software, which is a program that you can use to schedule people for, let's say, counseling things. Managing electronic health records with an e-record system. So basically, instead of having like a giant shelf or a filing cabinet, you can do it all online as well. And the one that they've recommended is called carepath.com. There's also psychoeducational websites and directories. So what this is it's information to help a person understand it more, right? Web pages that provide information to clients about mental health in a relatively static manner. Static manner means it doesn't change a lot, right? So it's dependable as a resource. There's Psych Central. There's also the National Institute of Mental Health, and then Good Therapy, and that will help find psychologists anywhere in the country for a person. So again, feel free to visit these websites after this lecture. Let's talk about now interactive self-guided interventions, which is basically you working on your own as a client, right? Interactive self-guided interventions. It's specific to a user's problem, and it does not involve a therapist. The treatment is completely provided by the computer with an elaborate feedback. So if you answer in a specific way, it'll give you a feedback in a specific way. Interventions are interactive and typically involve various multimedia formats. And here are some that the book recommends. Beating the Blues, which is about reducing depression. There's Mood Gym, which is about reducing anxiety and depression. There's also Down Your Drink, which is about problems with drinking. And then Fear Fighter, which is reduction of panic and phobias. And these are all websites that are recommended and trusted. And so I recommend you guys using it or exploring it. And then maybe you guys can use it for your own clients in the near future. Online support groups and blogs. Peer-led and peer-focused interventions. So that basically means, let's say that you are someone who is struggling with addiction, right? Your peers would be also people who are also like that as well. Or people who finally have been able to, let's say, gain control of it, right? So those are your peers. Support groups are interactive because there is an exchange between the users. Client communication with each other without professional interaction, express themselves, and then help each other. The two websites that the book recommends are sparkpeople.com, which is about healthier, happier lives, like let's say through diet and stuff like that. And there's also Big White Wall, which shares whatever is on their minds and helps them work through their issues with support of their peers. So it's other people supporting each other. It's versatile and in various formats. It could be a discussion forum, a bulletin board, or a live chat room. There's different styles. Now let's talk about text and chat messages. Text or private chat rooms allow for sharing feelings immediately. Text and chat messages can also be a really great reminder tool to stay on schedule. So you might subscribe to some sort of app that reminds you to take a break every hour or something like that. Because sometimes we get so focused that we overwhelm ourselves. So getting a text message to go, oh yeah, don't forget to take a 5-minute break right now. The websites that the book recommends are Talkspace and BetterHelp, which are helping you find therapy online. And then there's WhatsApp, which is an app that allows you to do texting, and I believe it is encrypted so that there's some confidentiality issues that it addresses. Blogs are more static, which basically means that they don't change the page all the time. Like, you know, it's pretty consistent and dependable. Blogs are also journals. You are allowed to express thoughts and feelings publicly. Facebook and Twitter are considered microblogging because you only have a certain amount of characters that you can type. And there's also feedback from posts that can be powerful or therapeutic. So like for example, in this illustration on this slide, it's a diabetes support group. So people can put in their own information and then other people will maybe make a comment about it. And of course, because if they are saying that you're an inspiration, you're going to feel good about yourself, and then that motivates you to continue, let's say eating healthier or managing your diabetes better. Now let's talk about the positives for technology-based resources for clients. Numerous resources available online or through computer software. And of course, professional counseling and psychology information banks are generally an accurate, easily assessed, frequently updated resource, like we talked about earlier. The negatives. Individually owned websites are not peer-reviewed or authenticated. Again, we're talking about sites that anyone can put up, so those are not trustworthy and could be very misleading. And sometimes people cannot tell the difference between something that is real or fake, right? So that can be very problematic. Some information may fail to download. Have you ever clicked on a link that didn't work? That can be very frustrating. Users have to be careful of information their peers provide. So example would be a pro-ANA group. ANA is short for anorexia. So a pro-ANA group would be a group of peers that actually encourages you to be anorexic. Wrong type of peer to peer support, right? So we have to now make sure that they're actually for the good or benefits you. To assess journals for the professional, it can be very expensive, which is why often people will enroll in school so that they have access to the library database. Ethical concerns. Counselors must verify the information that they receive or use is correct. Cross-check information found on the internet with other journal sources, and counselors are responsible for the information they use with or provide to clients. And that's something that's really true. Whenever I hear anything in the news or from gossip from friends, I'll say, where did you get that information from? And if they said Twitter, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to believe that. But if they said, I got it from a database that is specifically about, let's say, health, then I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm going to potentially read the article, actually find it and then read it so that I know and understand what was interpreted. Okay. And I encourage you guys to also do the same as well, because this is how you know and you can weed the lies from the truth. Now let's talk about technology and counselor supervision. The classic method was audio and videotaping sessions for review. So what that would be is, grabbing a camera, videotaping, and then we would play the video over in the classroom or with the supervisor, and then they would offer you tips and stuff like that. Now we can just use webcams instead. That would be for Skype, OVO, or Zoom. Many schools like one-on-one live supervision for immediate feedback. Some will use instant messaging to give live feedback as well. So that could be, let's say, have you ever seen those police dramas where there's a mirror and then the mirror behind it are a bunch of people watching the conversation? So that actually could be one scenario when it comes to training supervision. There's also dual track recording, which allows the supervisor to make comments as the video track is being played. This way, when the student receives the feedback, the comments are on top of the original tape, kind of like a director's cut on a DVD, where you'll get information. So you'll hear the counseling session, and then the supervisor might say, that was really great, or I would have rephrased this in this other way instead, right? So it's basically just a dual recording or two recording on the same track. Computers are used to allow students to role play crisis scenarios such as a client with suicidal ideation. So there might be a program that is created online where then they might have like a fake person basically say, I'm having a panic attack. And then you as a student might reply back or practice how to reply back to train yourself. There's also Blackboard or Moodle or Canvas, which are computer management systems or CMS, and that allows you to post course syllabus, calendar, posting the practicum training handbook, posting supervision seminar topics and relevant readings, provide access to many sources of information. There's also easy submission and reviews of student journals, management of supervisor-student dialogues with discussion threads and or chat rooms, enhance communication among students, provide electronic method for student evaluations to supervisors and sites, and format for submission and review of e-portfolios. So what all of this is saying is, like when you use Canvas, all this information can be provided for you, and then the client or the student can then get the information that way as well. Now let's talk about the positives in technology in counseling supervision. The positives are that the supervisor and the supervisee do not have to be in the same geographic location. Videotaping allows for accurate review of client-counselor interaction. Before, it was kind of like a memory. You're reporting something, right? But with video, you can both review it together and know exactly what happened. Allows for a reflection of the student counselor and multiple formats for instruction. So there's many ways that you can actually teach the student because of the technology. The negatives are there may be times when the student needs the supervisor immediately, but they don't get it because it's a distance thing, right? Or a time thing. Equipment can fail during a recording, and that has happened, right? Have you ever tried to record something and you thought you pressed record, but you didn't, or for some reason it turned itself off, or the battery dies? All those things that could happen. Computer viruses can corrupt computers and compromise hard drives, and DVDs can be misplaced, and that would be a confidentiality issue, right? If you forget your thumb drive or something like that, you're like, oh no, what was on there? People now can have access to it if it wasn't encrypted. Now let's talk about ethical concerns. Students and supervisors need to be extremely careful when communicating through email or the internet because hackers can get into email accounts very easily. Client identification must not be revealed. So we don't want their social security number, their address, and all that personal information on the internet. And also, sometimes when you go to a agency, you might get an email that has this at the bottom. The information contained in this email message may be privileged, confidential, and protected from disclosure. If you are not the intended recipient, any dissemination, distribution, or copying is strictly prohibited. If you think that you have received this email message in error, please reply to the sender to that effect. So that kind of helps and maintains some level of professionalism, and hopefully the other person who's receiving it will also respect that as well. Now let's talk about counselor education and continuing education. Online education is rapidly growing, and we can sort of see that because of this pandemic, right? And a lot of people are now at home learning from their computers. Distance learning programs, in terms of rehab counseling, KCREP has accredited 7 online master programs, and you can search for these online programs on oedb.org or degreesearch.org. And in terms of technology and continuing education, email listservs are used. There's blogs that are used, wikis. You guys will probably learn how to use PowerPoint, which is a multimedia presentation format. Of course, email, and then also virtual environments such as Second Life. And here's a YouTube video of a person demonstrating or explaining about what Second Life is all about. 3 technological media that can improve a counselor's education. 1. Computer-based simulation. The student is confronted with a real-life situation where he or she or they have to demonstrate the appropriate use of the therapeutic skills. Like we said before, a computer program that might have a panic attack scenario, and then that allows you to practice while you're sitting there to improve your responses. 2. Synchronous electronic learning, which is a live, real-time, interactive class led by an instructor, so like a live class on Zoom. And then asynchronous learning, self-paced learning process in which students access materials online wherever they are and whenever they want. Obviously, for some classes, you might have a deadline. Hybrid courses are online components with a traditional course. So it might be meeting some days or some weeks and then online completely on other weeks. There's also Psych Therapy, which is an online resource that provides videos demonstrating work with clinicians, with individuals, couples, and families. The NBCC provides access to credit for continuing education units, also known as CEUs. The ones in the book that they recommend is iCounseling, which is i-counseling.net. And there's also podcasts too. CounselorAudioSource.net is the one that the book recommends. It is discontinued, however, the recording database is still there so that you can actually access the conversations they had when the podcast was live. Now let's talk a little bit about the positives of counselor education and continuing education. Asynchronous instruction, convenient to complete assignments, flexibility in work and school schedule, and inability to travel for continuing education units is not an issue anymore. Before, it would cost potentially $1,000 for a person to pay for registration, a hotel, and the flight to go to a conference. And with CEUs online, then you don't have to do that anymore. The negatives would be internet servers can go down, computer viruses. Not everyone is computer literate, which basically means not everyone knows how to use a computer very well. Students need to have access to a modern computer and the appropriate software. So let's say if your computer is from 1997, it might not necessarily work very fast, right? Or you can't download certain programs, or you can't watch certain things because your computer is so old. Lack of face-to-face communication may hinder some students' learning, which is very true. And we hear about this in the pandemic where some students go, I really don't learn very well online, but I do learn when I'm face-to-face with someone in person. Let's talk about ethical concerns. Students need to make sure there is a legitimate licensing and credentialing board when it comes to their education. And then of course CEUs need to specify for what groups. Is it for social workers, psychologists, counselors, and stuff like that? Depending on your type of licensure or certification, you might need to go to very specific types of CEUs.